I did not go to Dartmouth. My parents didn't go to Dartmouth, and my children didn't go to Dartmouth, but nonetheless, I was recruited from Washington. And what you may not know is when you're invited up as part of the luring to Dartmouth, is many people ask you to take a walk around Ockham Pond. And when you go by this building, they're like, oh, that's a very special building, but it was under renovation. So thank you, this is my first time inside this very special building, and I appreciate you inviting me here after all the laps around Ockham Pond and saying yes to coming to Dartmouth. So what I was asked to do tonight is maybe talk a bit about my new role here running the Dickey Center for International Understanding, and why I actually think it's an amazing organization already, and why it really fits the moment we're in for the students, for the larger Dartmouth community, and for the world that we're seeing, frankly, being pretty shaken up, I think. And then also, I was asked to speak a little bit about Ukraine, so I might give some observations on the situation there. But what I really love, since I'm the new one here, is to have as much of a conversation with you all as possible. So, as you saw from the bio, I spent more than 30 years in Washington, and as noted, I've worked on everything from nuclear weapons policy to conflicts in Syria and South Sudan. But I really do think that the moment is such that no time in my career, I think since the end of the Cold War, have we seen fundamental challenges for which there are no easy policy solutions. You know, you see an administration in a country grappling with a global pandemic, which we keep hoping will go away, but maybe be with us for a while. We see climate change on a scale that is, I think, increasingly recognizable across all sectors of society. And with the war in Ukraine, it drives home great power competition and regional conflicts are still with us and changing in nature. And you add to that, I think, fundamental challenges to democracy, increasing authoritarianism around the world. It can be somewhat grim. On the other hand, I was delighted to be approached about the Dickey Center, which you all will know is named after the former president of Dartmouth, John Sloan Dickey. And when I heard part of the goal, it really struck a chord with me. That he would say to the students, and many of you might have known him or known of him, that the world's issues are your issues. They're not just over there. And there's nothing that better humans cannot address. And that really struck a chord with me. Here I am in Washington. And then I thought about it. I've been teaching at Columbia. And I sort of fell in love with teaching late in life. That the students were so smart and capable and ready to go into the world. It felt like a really important thing to help support their thinking about and being a part of those challenges. And then to see what the Dickey Center had been dedicated to. It was founded 40 years ago. It started with some student programs coming out of Baker Berry Library, some fellowships, and today we are a staff of 12 with a very decent endowment, and we work across a wide range of areas. So what I might do is sketch where we are now, tell you a bit about my aspirations with our team, and then turn to Ukraine. So there's roughly 5 pillars at the Dickey Center. The core part is working with students. So if you're a first-year student, you can apply for what's called Great Issue Scholars. 100 students are selected every year, and they become a cohort. And in the fall, they look at international peace and security. In the middle of the year, they look at global health. And by the spring, they're trying to think about the Arctic and climate issues. And so they get to know each other. And in my first reception I went, the student on my left was from South Sudan. The student across from me was from Kansas City. The young woman next to him was from Long Island, New York. And the other student next to me was from Ghana, with his musical instrument right behind his chair. And someone said to them, what do you like about Dartmouth? And they said, we love great issues because we're all different and we can talk to each other about these things that are challenging. So in a sense, it helps them build a community their first year at Dartmouth. It's not the only program, but it seems very special. And that follows on Dickey's vision of great issues for the senior year. For second and third and fourth year students, they can become War and Peace Fellows, or they can join Global Health Fellows. And these are all outside the classroom. We just came back from Washington. We took some of the War and Peace Fellows to Washington. They went everywhere from the old executive office building with a tour of that gorgeous building and all the little libraries out towards the west wing of the White House onto the street. So they met with the Senior Director for Defense, who's a Dartmouth graduate, who took about 45 minutes to walk through every issue on her plate. But then up the street, we meet with Washington Post journalists, turn the corner, go to Freedom House and talk about Afghanistan, and then go over to the Agency for International Development and meet the number 2 person there because she's a colleague of mine and her child goes here. So Dartmouth to me is like squeezing lemon juice over invisible ink. I never saw the networks until I got here, and now I see Dartmouth is everywhere. So these student programs are all outside the classroom, but they're meant to animate what goes on in the classroom. We also run an International Studies minor, which we think is in great popularity. We're looking to revise it. We support internships. We encourage students to design their own. They figure out where they want to go internationally. We can help support them, think about what they want to do, fund the program, and then come back to Dartmouth and meet with others who've traveled. Or partner programs. So the student work is a core. And I think I'm told we touch about 25% of the population on campus right now. I would love to expand that, but it's a great place to start. The other pillars of the Dickey Center are based on subject matters. So for example, we have the Arctic Institute. Many of you know about Dartmouth's long history working in the region of the Arctic world. We've had researchers there, everything from ice scientists to those who know the indigenous communities. But things are changing. There's no place that is quicker seeing the effects of climate change than that region. So the Arctic Institute has a number of priorities. Continue to work on research and science with the faculty here at Dartmouth and continue to support student researchers to go to the region. Increasingly, that means the region wants to partner with indigenous and local researchers. And because Dartmouth has been so engaged for so many years, they have those trusted partnerships, something that not every place has. My colleague, Melody Perkins, runs this. She took over from very well-known Ross, Virginia, a beloved professor here, and they've even been approached by the US State Department to say, you have relationships that we don't even have. How can we work together? So one part of that is research. The second is governance. With the shift of climate, there's a lot of countries eyeing the region of the Arctic. The politics are kicking in. And this is an area that generally has had a high level of cooperative governance. So some of our program is understanding those dynamics, working with partners, and Melody plays a role with the Arctic Council and with Arctic University and helps students understand this, as well as supports Fulbrights and visiting scholars at our institute. It's a very dynamic time. Another pillar is on global health, another area of expertise across Dartmouth and also with Geisel and other areas here on campus. What we're trying to do with this is work with student programming, so students have access to global health fellows. They do internships, and they can explore this whether or not they major in global health. They could be an engineer, they could be in poetry, they could be in sports, but you can be a global health fellow. And we're just starting a new project, which I'm very excited about. With the pandemic, there is a faculty member here who's been asked to serve on the equivalent of a 9/11 commission, looking at the origins of the pandemic and the consequences and how to prepare for the next one. So we said to her, where do you have to work? And she's like, So we're giving her a home for 18 months. We're going to support her doing workshops here at Dartmouth, bringing in outside experts, being involved with the students, and having an 18-month project, which I hope will help support recommendations at the national and international level as part of this group to try and look to how we prevent future pandemics. So I also think this gets the theme of consequence. How do you show students to break down big issues, be a part of thinking through how you address them, and helping resolve some of them, hopefully down the road. Two other areas, international peace and security. Dartmouth is very well known for its deep expertise in international security, much of it coming out of government, but not exclusively so. And we got a gift earlier last year, mid last year, to start a new initiative on global security. And to build off that faculty strength and try and engage more in Washington and Brussels and around the world with other scholars and practitioners to understand how the expertise here could actually work with others to address some of those issues. So we're building out a communications team, and we're going to have our first ever Dartmouth Forum conference on security in Washington in mid-May. And we're going to talk about China, Europe and Russia, the future of the multilateral system, and we've got experts on American public opinion to see if all of that lines up or is not at all related. So again, to me, some of these things already existed, and I'm excited to be part of thinking about what next. We have some aspirations to look stronger in international development. I've just brought in a woman who graduated from Dartmouth in 1982 and just finished leading the Agency for International Development's whole mission in Afghanistan. She was also tapped to be on the task force for the evacuation. She's retired to the area, and she's working with us for the term to think through the issues of international development and what we here at Dartmouth could do better, working across the faculty, the students, and the challenges she saw across her 30-year career. So am I lucky or what that this is the group that I get to work with? So let me touch briefly on a few aspirations, and then we can turn to Ukraine. So when I came, I also absorbed some of what the faculty, the administration, and the students I met, they have as aspirations for Dartmouth and for the Dickey Center. So the first part is, how do we broaden and deepen our touch across what I would call the Dartmouth community, the alumni, the students, the faculty. You could imagine we could become focused on just the subject matter experts. So to broaden and deepen our work, I'm looking to partner with other institutes and centers here on campus. So one of the speakers I brought, it's the anniversary of re-welcoming Native American students to campus. So I brought in a former diplomat who served the U.S. as a representative of the Human Rights Council, and at the time was the highest ranking Native American to be an ambassador. So we came here, we partnered with Native American Studies last month, actually it wasn't even last month, early April. So he both talked about federal Indian law, and from his perspective as a Cherokee, and he gave a talk on the use of force and human rights. And we co-sponsored each other's events. And I just think that deepens and broadens the audience for some of this work. The students mix better, faculty crosstalk, and it just strengthens the Dartmouth ties, as well as potentially our impact on the world. I was invited to the HOPS board meeting because the head of the Hopkins Center is interested in cultural diplomacy. How do we work with artists, performers, and others from around the world to keep conversations open at a time when governments may have more fractured debates? Formally, it could be called track 2, but I also think there's a lot to be said for the arts translating human experience and keeping those conversations going. I'll skip some more examples. The second charge I have is international. How do we put a face on what we're doing and bring more people from across the world here? Why does this matter? Because Dartmouth has just announced that it's going back to 8th line for international students. We're at roughly 15% today, but imagine this campus in the future. If the ability to pay is not a barrier to coming, what will this look like? We don't know. But we do know that global issues, there's a world out there. So with COVID being reduced, I would like to expand speakers from across the globe. Some of them may already be in the United States. Some will be scholars, some will be practitioners or diplomats. But I think with the student body, which is increasingly diverse and has either his family ties to other countries, has traveled themselves, or come from other countries, will benefit from seeing that kind of global view. So I think that also fits with questions President Hanlon and others have asked me, is what should Dartmouth's role in the world be? We don't have bricks and mortars all over, but we do have presence. How do we animate that? What does that look like? And then the third theme is impact. You know, it's never completely satisfying to just read the newspaper and not know what to do. And certainly those students here want to feel like there's a way to change something. And I remain an idealist even after my 30 plus years in Washington. I do think that a small band of people, smart people, can work together and try and make a difference. I've had that experience. I want to convey that to students. So I think that's what we're thinking about. What is Dartmouth as a platform, as an agent, as a place to convene experts and scholars? What can that look like? How do we show students what that looks like? And then how do we empower them as well? One aspect of that is opening up doors on career paths into the international arena. Some of them are not obvious. You can't always apply to go to grad school for everything. But creating a network of alumni who say, yes, I'd be happy to talk to you. I will be on a career panel. I will meet with this student. Here's someone I know. That I would like to build that out so they feel that they could follow what they care about, what they're smart about, and understand how they might even get to work in those fields. So those are a few themes, but as I said, I'm new. I need some help. I need to meet fantastic alumni and understand what you can tell me about what's been tried, what hasn't been tried, how we open some of these doors. And just one last thing. The meeting I came right from is on scholars at risk. There's a number of faculty who are tied to scholars in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Russia, and before that, in Afghanistan and elsewhere, where people had to flee. Well-known scholars or young scholars. We're trying to think about how we bring them here to Dartmouth. So that's another thing that this group might be interested in along with. Now, the topic of Ukraine. I just maybe will offer some observations because I have no secret intelligence brief or maybe an easy answer to what we're seeing. My first observation on working around the UN Security Council is how amazing it is that Russia, as a member of the UN Security Council, a permanent member with a veto, took none of its concerns about its own security or its accusations against Ukraine to any of those bodies. If it genuinely thought that the Russian-speaking population was at risk of genocide or abuse, it has complete access to convening any meeting it wants to talk about that. If it wished to redo the Minsk Accords or debate the boundaries, same thing. It has a permanent seat on the Security Council. If it was worried about nuclear proliferation in Ukraine, it could easily have talked about it. So what's amazing to me is to watch them skip all of that. When the US invaded Iraq, it did so over the protests of other nations. But it did give speeches in the General Assembly by President Bush, by Colin Powell and others in the Security Council, and made its best case. And so while it did not get support, it did not circumvent the international community. So this is a sign in the great debate whether that shows the international community does not work, or I would argue it does work, and the only way Russia could do this is by going around that community. You don't track the votes on this, but there have been a number of votes in the General Assembly that have condemned Russia and also kicked it out of the Human Rights Council. And many would say, well, countries didn't all support it. But to see the number of abstentions shows you they do not have much of a coalition. The second part, of course, is humanitarian. And I think that the long-term implications of what we've already seen are far-reaching. The numbers of people fleeing Ukraine or internally displaced are kind of hard to imagine, and we know it's going to get worse. It'll disrupt not just Ukraine, but the regions around it in Europe. We already had a displacement crisis of 84 million people around the world not in their homes. Some are refugees, some are internally displaced. To that we add, I think now, over 7 million either fleeing Ukraine or displaced in Germany. And so how the world grapples with that at a time with the resources, the access, and the geopolitics of it is not easy to say. So that would be a second challenge. I think the third is how do we end this conflict? And so watching the coalition build a sanctions regime, limits on banking, freezing of assets, and a broad political coalition on one hand is pretty amazing. I've never seen anything like it. But it's not clear that's enough to change the way that Putin and his regime think about their goals and what they want to accomplish. And also sanctions are a very slow way to change behavior. The US and allies arming Ukraine is sort of amazing to watch as well. But I noted that even Senator Coons and others have asked what are our red lines? At what point is it not going to be intolerable to watch this country bombed? On the other side, people say, this is a nuclear country, this is a nuclear armed state, Russia, they want us to be their enemy, so the last thing we can do is provoke a wider war. For that, I do not have an easy answer. But I do think we, in this country and elsewhere, have to talk seriously about what the consequences of unchecked violence there will be. I'm sorry that is not a cheerful story. My host asked me to speak about this because I think it's on our minds. Maybe the only positive thing I will say is it is connecting us to the world in a way that sometimes is very abstract. And a lot of Americans have connections to Europe, to the region, to conflict, people who have served in war, they know the costs. Many of us have relatives who have left violence as such. And so I hope that conversation leads us to new tools and approaches, something I've been able to work on in my life, although not for a situation quite like this. So let me open up now. I hope that's enough to kick off the conversation. And thank you again for inviting me. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Russia will stop at nothing to avoid being seen as defeated. So, in your opinion, is there a reasonable solution to end this conflict?
I think the hardest part about your question is we do not know what's in Putin's mind or those in power with him, right? What actually is his calculation? There's a lot of debate about whether and why he's motivated now to go into Ukraine. Just on its face, you watch the struggle the U.S. has had in Afghanistan and Iraq to maintain a country. So even if you go in and take charge, running a country, stabilizing it, making it your own, that is odd. So I don't know Putin's calculations. What we're seeing is an effort to nonetheless shift his thinking towards some sort of political off-ramp. The idea of squeezing so hard, the banking, the sanctions, his economy, forcing, frankly, some of his oligarchs to go to him and say, okay, this isn't working. I can't fly to London and hang out. And, the internal calculations will be painful enough. We don't know if that's going to work. I do hope that some of the countries that did not vote with the U.S. or vote with Russia are doing some quiet shuttle diplomacy. There's both official and unofficial diplomatic efforts going on now. I talked to one ambassador in the UN who works for an ally country of the U.S. who said he's been asked to advise the Ukrainians on their diplomatic strategy. I'm hoping the countries, it's been in the news, Israel, Turkey, maybe India, maybe China, are trying to navigate where this ends. Because where does this end? And I think what may be missing is a conversation of American red lines. Are we okay if they don't go into NATO? What if they use chemical weapons? What if they bomb the West? What if they blockade all of Ukraine? I don't have easy answers to these things. So the answer is we need a political solution. The best thing is we end this. There are people in the public talking about, well, go back to some sort of status quo. Russia gets Crimea and gets control of some of the cities in the east. What would make Ukraine state leadership there say that's okay? I have no idea. If anyone has an easy answer, tell me now and I will get you on a plane.
Can I just quick follow up? Is there enough power, authority in Russia to change Putin's calculus on this?
Does anyone here know the answer to that?
If you don't, I'm sure nobody else knows.
Perhaps the people who know the answer wouldn't be saying out loud who those folks are and how to influence them. I mean, one thing I will give credit to the Biden administration about is the use of declassifying information before the invasion to let people know what they thought was coming. And when we were with the students in Washington a few weeks ago, we were informally saying to some of the people in the U.S. government, well done. Like, you tried to get ahead of this. You tried to warn folks. You tried to prepare for what was coming. And they instead were kicking themselves. We should have had more aid pre-positioned in Europe. We should have anticipated the number of fleeing. We should have. So it's a live conversation that you're asking. I saw a hand over here.
First question is,
Do you want to
what do you think Biden's chances of going to Ukraine are to increase responsibly?
So the first question is what the chance of Biden going into Ukraine, and
Yeah.
the second one,
What is it Putin's responsibly?
what would Putin's response be? You're asking me all the questions that I think are really hard to answer. I think Biden's been very clear, not 1 inch into NATO, but he's been really clear. Otherwise, I don't think the U.S. will go into Ukraine in the current posture. I'm just beginning to see some debate about that.
No, but my question is, what do you think Biden's chances are?
What Biden's chances are.
Going to Ukraine. Not as in our forces, but
Oh, Biden visiting? Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. Do you?
I don't think he's going to go.
I doubt it. But you know, who did go? Did Boris Johnson went, I think. And 3 of the Baltic presidents went. I think the U.S. is trying very hard to not give Putin the West as an enemy, and the U.S. in particular, because it would make it easier for him to justify what he's doing. Yes, sir.
I'm your bartender tonight.
You don't appear to be doing your job.
And I'll be back on the job after these questions. And my question has to do with the Dickey internship program and the class of 66, I guess that's what it is, endows several of those students each year. And I'm wondering, how have the pandemic and the war going on affected the program, the choices of students and where they want to go, and your ability to send them?
One thing I learned early about Dartmouth was the phrase base camp to the world, and this sort of unstoppable spirit to go out and about. I will say though, coming out of the pandemic and COVID, we were surprised how many students just wanted to hug the Dartmouth campus. They were not interested. They just gotten out of their parents' guest room and too many Zoom calls, and they wanted to be on campus and with their friends. However, I think right now we have at least 5 international students on internships from the Dickey Center. And I talked to Casey Aldrich, who runs a lot of our student programs, before I came tonight. And she said applications for the summer are through the roof. So they have gotten their dose of the green at Dartmouth, and they're ready to start traveling again. So it's very exciting. I don't think the war will slow them down. I am meeting with no less than 4 different groups of students tomorrow, and I know that 2 had the idea, like, how can we sneak into Ukraine and help with refugees? So I don't think my job is to tell them to do that, but I appreciate their ambition. So I'll keep you notified. Yeah.
Go ahead. No, you go. I've seen several Ukrainian undergraduates at Dartmouth interviewed or in the Daily Dartmouth. I'm sure there are Russian students at Dartmouth, and you may not have had any interaction with them. But if you have, or have you heard anything about their attitude regarding what's going on?
It's a really good point. I have been in events and heard from the Ukrainian students. There's at least 4 here who are willing to speak and have even been interviewed on the radio from Ukraine. We had actually a few students who were trying to get out. There's at least one who's trying to get out of Ukraine when the war started. And we also have faculty here who are Ukrainian, although they range across different departments. And the Russian Studies department has also been very involved. But your point is a good one. I do not know how many Russian students we have on campus. I do believe we have some. I've not spoken directly to them. The larger point is that we are seeing people flee Russia and Belarus as well. And I think that's one of the conversations is how do you support the students here? We have some graduate students, and then do we have room to bring in visiting scholars and practitioners? Because in addition to, say, sitting at the Dickey Center, they're going to need a place to live. They may have kids to put in school, they've never lived in the United States before, and it's not cheap to find a place to live here. So we just literally had this conversation with the provost's office about how do we line this up and make it work. So, but I'll follow up on that Russia question. It's a really good one. Over here.
I was going to lighten up the situation.
Excellent, thank you.
Tell us about your growing up. Because I know where you grew up in, I think I do.
I grew up in a small town on the coast of Maine, which many only know in the summertime in Ellsworth, which is up near Arcadia National Park. My dad's long-term Maine, but my mom was from New York City, was trained as an artist, and my dad invited her to a town called Blue Hill. It's impossible not to fall in love in Blue Hill because it's right on the coast. It's very charming. No, it was a great place to grow up. But it was different because there weren't a lot of kids who had traveled with my parents. There weren't a lot of families right in our hometown who had traveled what my parents had. But it's a beautiful place. So I was happy and looking forward to going out of state for college, much as I enjoyed it. I joke that I got my political and policy chops in my small town of Ellsworth because I used to walk to school, and I found out at the beginning of my senior year they canceled driver's ed. You know, it's like New Hampshire, you have to be able to drive. So I was outraged. And all the other kids just learned how to do it in the field. But I had to take the class because we lived in town. And so I went to the school board meeting and made a presentation that we had to reinstall driver's ed. And they voted to do it. And so I felt empowered for the rest of my life. Anyway, I'm happy to answer questions about coastal Maine, where to go. I will hand draw driving routes for you. Okay. Although when we moved here, my husband joked, there's no secret highway. It's still 6 hours or 5.5. I mean, you for some reason have to go south to go north. Yes.
We used to say you can't get there from here.
Yeah. And you're from Boston, which was the big town that we always wanted to go to.
I'm not from Boston.
You're not from Boston.
Chicago.
Sorry. Chicago.
I'm the one from Boston.
It makes gas.
Yes, sir.
About 35 years ago, Syracuse had an arrangement with the embassy in France to have internships during the summer, and a group of about 6 students would come over and would work with 6 French students during that period of time, primarily in commercial activities.
Oh.
Is there a chance that with your involvement here with the Dickey Center and your connections at state, that programs like that could be resurrected? They did work well. I know times have changed since then.
You mean having a university connection?
Having a connection where Dartmouth would organize a group of students on their leave term that would go to an embassy, and the embassy would pair them up with host country students.
That's a great idea. You know, I'm still new here, so everything seems possible to me. And I do know a number of ambassadors, including, I just met Mark Brzezinski, who is the Dartmouth grad, who's the ambassador to the United States in Poland. And we had a conversation right in early January about how we can work together. And he's like, I'll do whatever you're interested in. He's interested in Arctic, he's interested in security. And he kind of casually said, let's do a follow-up meeting, of course, unless Russia invades Ukraine, and then I might get busy, which unfortunately is exactly what happened. But no, I think that's a great idea. The State Department now does host interns overseas in the embassies, and they've just announced increasing internships that are paid. So maybe there's a cohort, we could come up with some relations the way you suggest.
The internships are paid overseas?
Yep. It's nice. Yeah, I know. Because otherwise it's hard for students to do it if they don't have access to resources to travel. Yeah.
So hi, I'm class of 57, and we are very proud of the money we send to you that is used apparently very effectively for these kinds of things. And would like to thank you for also naming, did you say tonight you have a course called Great Issues?
Yes, the Great Issues Scholars of first years.
We've been asking forever, and that's a great thing because that really was the spirit, and thank you. And on this other point that I'm interested in, so the Irving Institute and all that it's combined seems to have a lot of the same purposes and talk about it a lot, particularly in technology. How can we combine with them? Like my reunion class wants to have a tour of the Irving Center. I've made my own tour there. It's impressive, significant. Yeah. And the Computer Science Center. And they don't mention the Dickey Center now.
What?
No, I'm serious.
Just turn them in.
I'm serious. They've raised a lot of money, $250 million. Never in the presentation about the international position of Dartmouth did they ever mention his name or your section. I'm trying to piece that together because they got so much more money. And you're doing the right things in my mind to keep your focus on those areas. The Arctic Institute, for instance, got to be important to their science of the North.
So it's interesting. I think what I have experienced is, as a new person, I'm able to reach out across Dartmouth and meet with pretty much anybody I want. But what you find is that most people get so busy in their day jobs, it's not intentional not to include others. It's just they're focused on building a building like the Irving Institute or running their programs. So that's one of my goals, is to better connect. Actually, Irving, I heard about before I came. And the earlier director, Elizabeth Wilson, open arms. We were planning, and we'll continue to plan, a workshop that looks at renewable energy in fragile states. So, for example, if you're a business person and you work in renewable energy, you are unlikely to go to countries in conflict. But I've been running a project where we say to the United Nations, you're operating in Somalia, Congo, Mali, places in conflict, you're dragging old diesel generators around with you. Why don't you think about using energy as a service? Why don't you invest in renewable and then leave it for the communities behind and meet the climate goals of our host nations? So they got very excited. Irving has been a partner on this, and we've had at least one event together. So I'll just check who their PR person is. One more thought for you is the West End, I think, is opening May 13, 14, 15. And I think that's very exciting. And everybody is welcome, I think, to the West End opening and Irving being open. It's a beautiful building, as you said.
Right. And just a quickie, so our 65th reunion is coming up in September. We'd love to have, and we are going to take a tour of that place. I've asked Melody to consider how we can put together that she's there, or you could be there, or whatever you want, because it would help, I think. And be a lot of fun.
What's that?
And be a lot of fun.
Yes, that would be a lot of fun. Thank you.
Tori, where is your headquarters? Are you in Haldeman?
We are in Haldeman Hall, right on the first floor. There's a little Rousseau gallery, and we also have offices on the third. So come by any time. Maybe I'll finish with two thoughts. One, we have a really great event next week that is open to the public. We have a New York Times bestselling author, John Barry, who wrote a book on the 1918 pandemic, twinned with Kendall Hoyt, who is affiliated both with Geisel and with Thayer. And they're going to be talking in conversation about the origins of the pandemic, consequences, and where we go from here. He's a really great speaker. So that's next Thursday in Philean, and I'm happy to, I have some posters I brought, happy to leave that or share that with our host tonight to let you all know. And then this summer, we're going to be bringing back something called the Yali Alumni, which are these young African leaders who are now in their late to mid-20s or early 30s. They've many years been coming to the United States, but they came once, and we are getting 25 to be here between July and August, because Dartmouth is known as one of the best hosts of this annual conference. And we're excited. Many of them are entrepreneurs, innovators, leaders, and it'll be an exciting time. So there'll be at least a few events this summer if you're in town. So I think with that, any other last questions? Yeah.
Can I ask just one more question? I heard recently that the Russian ambassador in Washington commented that he had not talked to Putin since 1917.
Was he alive in 1917?
Was Putin alive?
No. What year?
2017. Which seems like a long period of time. But, and we also are well aware that Putin has changed the command of some of his generals, and he's lost several of his generals. From an outsider, it appears that the brain trust that Putin may have, his escorts, his support, may be changing dramatically. How do you look to see who now has his ear and who he's listening to when it's apparent from outside anyway that he's not following the procedures that he used to follow?
It's interesting. We had a visitor yesterday, if you've heard of John Deutsch. He was the Deputy Secretary of Defense in the Clinton administration and the head of the CIA. So we co-hosted him with the Dartmouth Political Union, a student group, and he got a version of this question. Although the student said, basically, isn't the KGB the worst organization in Russia? And, Putin comes from it. And Deutsch said, well, actually, no, they're very professional. And we used to talk to them all the time. So in a sense, what you're saying is it a stable place, or is Putin reorganizing who his leadership is and who he relies on? And that seems to be a bit of what the press is covering with the shifting of the general now in charge after what is, by most accounts, a disastrous first attack on Ukraine. I am not a Sovietologist, I'm not a Russian expert, but I would recommend Bill Wolford, who's a fantastic professor on campus, who probably could answer your question down to the middle initial of all the top Russian officials. So I recommend him as a future speaker.
Even in the 1970s?
Even in 1970.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.